Good evening. Hello to everyone. I'm launching my new channel, YouTube channel, which will be conducted in English language, where I will publish my lectures in English, my talks, my interviews. And I start this channel with my first project, which is live streaming about Israeli elections. The Israeli election scheduled for the 1st of November this year. 8 episodes are scheduled in which I will try, with the help of my guests, to analyze and elucidate different aspects of this election, the electoral system, the party that are running, the campaign, and of course the results. And this first episode will be dedicated to elucidating, explaining in simplest possible ways the basics of the Israeli electoral system. So you're all welcome to join watching this episode. I encourage you to do likes to this episode because the YouTube algorithm works this way, that the more you put likes during the live streaming, the more it spreads and more people can watch it. And of course, you're welcome to comment in the chat to this live streaming and ask questions. And to the extent possible, we'll try to address these questions. Later, Professor Avram Diskin, who is a distinguished scholar and expert in electoral systems and Israeli politics, will join me. But I will start with general explanations about the basics of Israeli political system and how what actually is the procedure of election. Israel is a parliamentary republic, which means that its government is appointed by parliament and is accountable to the parliament. There is no separate election to an independent executive branch, like, for example, in the United States. So our government is appointed by our parliament. Therefore, the parliamentary election in Israel is a consequential election. This is an election that establishes completely who is going to govern us during the next years. The Israeli parliament is called Knesset. It's supposed to serve up to 4 years. So the elections are scheduled for every 4 years. But it rarely happens that Israeli parliaments run their whole term. Usually early elections are called. But what happened during the last 2 years and a half is quite unusual, because this is already 5th election within the span of 2.5 years, and it reflects on political instability that exists in our system. But we will explain this in the following episodes. The Israeli parliament consists of 120 members, and there is only one chamber. There is no second or upper chamber in Israel. There's only one chamber, and it consists of 120 members. And these 120 members are elected through the proportional electoral system. In general, there are 2 kinds of electoral systems. One is proportional, that is where the parties receive more or less the amount of seats, or the proportion of seats equal to the proportion of votes they received. The other system is a majoritarian system, in which usually voters vote for specific candidates in separate political districts. So our system is a proportional system, which means we vote for parties and the seats are distributed proportionally. And there are different kinds of proportional systems in the world. And usually in most systems, there is some mixture of the elements of proportionality and majoritarity. And Israel is at the most pure extreme of proportional systems. So there is no majoritarian elements in our electoral system. In this sense, we are close to countries such as Netherlands. And what this practically means is that the whole of Israel, or the whole citizen body of Israel that votes, is one electoral district. So we all vote for the entire body of the Israeli parliament, for all 120 members of Knesset. So we have equal impact. Each of us has equal impact in determining who will serve in the entirety of Israeli parliament. And we vote for lists of candidates, not for specific candidates, but for lists, electoral lists. Now, it's important to know that we don't vote for party lists. There is this technical, formal term, electoral lists. Usually, and in most cases, electoral lists is presented by a certain political party. But it doesn't necessarily have to be the case. For example, several parties can make an agreement between themselves and to present a joint list, electoral list. What is important, what counts for the purpose of the election is not a party, but the electoral list. For example, in the current parliament, we have some lists which represent one party. For example, Likud party has its electoral list and therefore electoral faction in the parliament, or Labour party. But there are some lists which are unions between different parties. For example, there is a electoral list called the Jewishness of Torah. It's a religious Orthodox electoral list, which is a union of two religious Jewish Orthodox parties. Or they have a joint Arab parties list. And what's interesting is that one or even more parts of this list, they're also not parties. For example, one of the components of this united joint Arab list is a conglomerate called Hadash, that is technically not a party. It's a coalition of several groups, of which the dominant one is a party. It's a new communist party. But for the purpose of the election, not parties are important, but the electoral lists. Now, the proportional system that we have in Israel is called closed list proportional system. What does it mean, closed list proportional system? It means that when I come to the voting box and I vote for an electoral list, I have no say over who and in what order is listed in that list. If a certain party decides to present an electoral list where the first person is Peter, the second is Stephen, and the third is John, I can't decide that I want someone else, or I don't want John in that list. And I also can't decide in what order they appear on that list. It's fait accompli. I just vote for that party list. It's not the only possible system. There are many electoral systems in which there are open electoral lists. That is, the voters may mark their preferences. They may decide, okay, the party listed Peter as the first person in that list, but I want John to be the first person in that list. I want Mary to be the first person, and Peter to be the second person in that list. And there are even some systems in which voters may mark preferences not in the party they vote for, but also in some other party. But that's not the case in Israel. In Israel, I vote only for the list, which and the names of the candidates were predetermined in that list. Why is the order of the candidates in the list important? Because it actually determines who, according to the results, enters the parliament. For example, if a certain electoral list receives 6 seats, this means the candidates listed from number 1 to number 6, they become the members of the parliament. The 7th person is outside of the parliament. However, it is important if you're listed as a 7th or 10th or 15th. Why? Because during the term of the parliament, some members may resign or may die. And at the moment this happens, the next person in the party list automatically becomes the member of the parliament, replaces the member who resigned or died. Therefore, it's quite important if you in the list that received 6 seats in the election, if your place is 7th or 15th. Usually, therefore, most electoral lists present more candidates that they realistically hope to get. And some big parties even tend to present lists of 120 candidates, although they may realistically hope for 4 or 40 or 30 members of the parliament. And indeed, there's never been a case that any electoral list in Israel obtained, as a result of election, absolute majority. So there was never a case when a party received 61 seats in the Israeli parliament. And this is actually quite a common case in proportional representation systems. In these systems, usually no party receives absolute majority, and the party needs to form a coalition with other parties in order to reach that absolute majority. Okay, so this is about lists that run for the election. How does the procedure technically take place when we vote? Actually, it's very, very simple. We don't have those complex bulletins when you need to mark names or parties. It's very, very simple. When I, as a voter, come to the ballot box, I see this box. In this box, you can see pieces of paper, the symbols of different electoral lists. Symbols of electoral lists are usually letters associated with that electoral list, Hebrew letters. Every electoral list gets its Hebrew letter or combination of Hebrew letters, and therefore I know what party I support for, or what list I support. I choose one piece, depending which party I want to vote, and I vote for that. I just put this specific party in the envelope, and I put the envelope into the ballot box. For example, here you can see a person who wants to vote for her Orthodox Jewish list, the Jewishness of Torah. This list has a symbol, the third letter of a Hebrew alphabet. This is Gimel. This big letter that you see is a Hebrew letter Gimel. So this person puts that particular piece into the envelope, and that's all. That just takes a few seconds to vote, and you are free. So that's a very simple system. After the voting ends, we have the votes are counted, and the seats are allocated proportionally according to the number of votes each electoral list received in the election. This is actually not as simple as it looks, and later I will talk with Professor Diskin about different complications around this allocation of seats. But okay, the voting ended, the seats are allocated, and now the task is to form the government. What usually happens is that the president of Israel, who's mainly a symbolic figure, but at this moment he entered the play, and he conducts she conducts consultations with the representatives of those factions that were elected to the parliament, and asks one member of Knesset to form the government. And according to law, it can be any member of the parliament, who agreed to take upon himself or herself that role. Although the informal expectation is that it will be usually the member of parliament who has most chances to obtain 61 majority, who will back that government. And usually, again, informally, it would be the head of the largest party within the governing coalition, not necessarily the largest party in general, but the largest party in the general coalition. But there is no necessity, no legal necessity that it will be so. And in fact, in the current parliament, for the first time, the first serving prime minister was the leader of a relatively small party. His name is Naftali Bennett. His party, called Yamina, which means in English to the right. This party received only 7 seats in the parliament, and nevertheless, he was appointed prime minister. This is absolutely legal, and it's something which is according to the law. And the current prime minister of the transitional government in Israel, his name is Yair Lapid, is actually the head of the largest party in governing coalition. It's called Yesh Atid. There is a future. It has 18 seats. And yet, it's not the largest party in the current parliament. The largest party is Likud, and its leader is Benjamin Netanyahu. And nevertheless, he is not prime minister. Why? Because he failed to get the backing of the absolute majority of the members of the Israeli parliament. And the governing coalition excludes Likud, but it has these parties like Yesh Atid and Yamina, and now the head of the largest is party in that coalition is the prime minister. And finally, a few words about non-confidence to the government. Okay, the government is, the parliament is elected, it votes confidence for the government, government begins to serve, and then for some reasons, government loses the support. So there can be a motion of non-confidence for the government. However, for the last 20 years, there's been an amendment to the law which said that this non-confidence is valid only when it is a positive vote of non-confidence. What does it mean, positive non-confidence? This means that it's not enough that the majority of the members of Knesset say we don't like this government. They have to form an alternative coalition which enjoys the majority. This is a system which exists in countries such as Germany and Spain, and recently only in Israel. Although there's never been a case where this actually happened, but the law states if you want to vote non-confidence in the government, you need to present and immediately present the alternative to that government. And the idea behind this rule is, of course, it provides a government with the most stability. For example, if there is a government of the parties of the center, which is not liked by right-wing and not liked by left-wing parties. And maybe these parties, both together, they have majority in the parliament, so they can agree that they both don't like the current government, but they can't agree on the next coalition. Nevertheless, this is not bulletproof protection for the serving government, because even if the government is not voted out by the vote of non-confidence, nevertheless, if it loses the support of the majority of the members of parliament, it's difficult for it to govern. For example, it can't pass the budget. If it can't pass the budget, the parliament is dissolved automatically. But even if it passes the budget, but is struggling to pass other legislation, it's very difficult for such a government to govern. And although formally it doesn't have to resign, its term will probably come to an end, because practically it's very difficult for it to continue to exist. And this is what happened to the current government. At a certain point, this government, which started with 62 majority, its majority was reduced actually to 60, which stopped being majority. So this government decided we can't continue. We initiate legislation for early election, and we'll try to obtain to secure majority from the voters. So these are the basics of the Israeli electoral system, how the parliament is elected and how the government is appointed. But now, today, I want to focus on a specific issue of allocating the seats in the parliament. And for this purpose, I invited a colleague of mine and a teacher of mine, Professor Avram Diskin, who was my teacher at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Good evening, Professor Diskin, and thank you for joining me.
Hi. I'm very happy to be in that discussion.
Okay, so I will start with the details about how actually, once the voting is over, how the results are counted. And although it looked for I think for the voters, for the viewers, it looks like a very simple system, and indeed, the Israeli electoral system is very, very simple. When people say that the Israeli politics and political system is complicated, what they mean is that the party fragmentation and party dynamics is very complex, and that's true. And about this, we will talk about the next stream, next episode. But the system is very simple, and nevertheless, even in this system, there are some complications about how the things are decided about to what party, how many seats go. Why is it important? We are now going to focus on details on nuances of this system, but this is important because we have very close results. Even in these nuances may have very serious political consequences. Those of you who really want to understand how the dynamics of Israeli politics need to be attentive to these details. So the story begins with the counting of votes proceeds in several stages, and we kind of we'll discuss it not on the basis of the existing Israeli parliament with 120 seats, but there is an imaginary parliament. Imagine there is a parliament of 10 seats which are allocated proportionally. So how, according to the Israeli system, counting of the votes goes? Okay, so imagine that in total 10,300 voters did come to the ballot box and threw the envelope into the box. What happens then? First, there are some not very big amount, but there are always some votes which are recognized as illegal, as disqualified. Why? Because they did something wrong. For example, they put two pieces of paper of two different parties. This is not allowed. This vote gets disqualified. There are some other situations in which a vote can be disqualified, and these votes just removed from the total. We ignore them. They don't count at all. For example, so in my example, out of the entirety of 10,300 votes, 100 of votes got disqualified by the election committee. So we have now 10,200 valid votes. But that's not all. Because like most countries, even with especially with proportional representation, we have something which is called electoral threshold. Electoral threshold means that electoral lists must secure a certain percentage of votes in order to enter the parliament. At the moment, the electoral threshold in Israel is 3.25%. So once we counted these 10,200 votes, which are valid votes, we need to determine what is the amount of votes each party, each electoral list needs to secure, and 3.25% for this number is 332 votes. And let's look at the hypothetical situation when we have only three lists. List A that receives 1,700 votes, List B that receives 8,300 votes. So these both lists get more than 332 votes. But there is also a third list which received only 200 votes. 200 votes is less than 332, and therefore this list doesn't enter the parliament. Its votes are not counted anymore. They are not relevant for the purpose of allocations of seats. So we remain with 10,000 voters. How conveniently, I just put round number, 10,000 voters that voted for the two parties that really crossed this electoral threshold. And now you can take a deep breath and say, oh, now it's easy. Now we are going to allocate the seats, a proportional representation, everything is easy. But actually now the complications begin. And therefore I invited here Professor Diskin, who will explain to us all these complications and changes in the Israeli law which determine actually how many seats each of these two parties is going to get in the Israeli parliament. Professor Diskin, yes. Now I pass the back to you. Yes, sorry, just Professor Diskin disappeared. Exactly at the time when we wanted to hear his opinion. Right, we are going to wait for him, but I will continue. Okay. Now, Professor Diskin. So, yeah, please. What happens now? Why is the situation not so clear-cut?
We missed the last sentences because something went wrong. But let me say, to repeat just the basics of what you said before that I did here. First of all, everyone in any democratic country and even in non-democratic country knows what invalid votes are. The basic idea is that votes which you cannot say really who the voter supported, of course, such a vote is invalid. The example that you gave is very good. You put signs of three different parties. So is the real party that the voters support? You don't know it. The other reason is that something really disclose who is the voter. You put a special sign. You write your name on the paper. So these are invalid votes, and of course, such votes are not counted. And usually, we have around some people do that purposely. They as a protest or something. And you have around 1% of votes which are invalid, and they are of course not counted. The other votes which are not counted are votes given to parties or to electoral lists which didn't overcome the threshold, which is, as you mentioned before, today it is 3.25%. And in the example that you discussed, 3.25 is about 322 votes. And if someone got less, in your example, 200, the vote is valid, but it's not counted. Okay, you can't really take consideration. Now, in this example, I don't know what you really said before, we have 10,000 votes given to parties that overcame the threshold. And one party, list A, got 1,700 votes. Okay, of course, it overcame the threshold easily. The other party got 8,300 votes. It also passed the threshold easily. So now the question is, who is going to get what? So first, we calculate the quota per seat. How many votes you really have to pay for a single seat? And this is done in Israel. It is the total number of valid votes given to parties that passed the threshold, met the threshold, divided by 120. In our example, you have a parliament of only 10 seats. So you have valid votes of parties that overcame the threshold. You have 10,000 such votes. You divide by 1,000 by 10, and the quota per seat is 1,000 votes. Now, list A has a full quota. Okay, it has more than 1,000 votes, but not enough for 2 seats, which is 2,000. Okay, Party B had 8 full quotas. So we know how to divide 9 of the 10 seats. And the question in this example is who is going to get the 10th seat? One system which was used in many countries for many years is to say, well, we will allocate the additional seat to the parties with the largest remain. So the party A got 1,700 votes. It has a remains of 700. Okay, and 700 is more than the remains of the other party, which is 300. They had a quota for 8 seats, but altogether 8,300. So they have the largest remainder between the two parties, and they will get the seat. And Israel used that system until the early 1970s. The system, by the way, was first, I think, invented by an English person by the name of Thomas Hare in the 19th century. And then different countries moved to some other tricky calculation because they really wanted to make some kind of a trick in order to help, for instance, the large parties. And the system that we used in Israel, we call it after 2 Israeli politicians, actually 2 experts, MKs were also experts in the 2 largest parties, but really the system in the world is called after a Belgian scholar by the name of D'Hondt, Victor D'Hondt, or after a Swiss scholar with 2 family names, Hagenbach Bishop. So what's that system? The idea is you take the number of seats given to the party, and you say, well, let's take party A. It for sure it deserves to have 1 seat. What's going to be the average, the mean payment of that party per seat if we add to it 1 seat? So we take the 1,700 votes that party had, and we say if we give the 2nd seat to that party, the mean payment of that party is going to be 1,700 divided by 2, which is 850. Okay, that's going to be the mean payment. If we'll take the other party, the large party, party B, we know that that party deserves 8 seats. And we say, suppose that we'll add 1 seat to that party, so we'll have to take the number of votes given to that party, to that list, 8,300, and divide by 9 at the 8 seats which were already guaranteed, and the additional seat that party deserve. Okay? And in that case, we divide 8,300 by 9, and the mean result is a little bit more than 922. So in that case, the mean payment, if we add an extra seat to party B, is higher than the mean seat if we add the extra seat to party A. It is higher, in spite of the fact that the remaining votes, besides the full quotas that the parties had, are higher for party A. The mean payment, if we add a seat to party B, is higher than if we add the extra seat to party A. Okay? And obviously, in that case, we'll allocate the extra seat to party B. And party B will get 9 seats, and party A only remain with its single seat. Okay, in spite of the fact that it has such a large number of redundant votes. So what we see in that example is that the highest mean system, the D'Hondt or Hagenbach-Bishop system, really favors a little bit, the large parties. It is used in many countries, by the way. Okay, because in many countries you want to help the large parties somehow. So that's a calculation that helps the large parties. And by the way, there are other calculations which are made in other countries, but we are not going to mention all of them. These are the two, I think, most common systems. We used to use the Hare system, the largest remainder system, in the past until 1973. And since 1973, we are using the highest mean system, which helps a little bit the large parties. They benefit.
And I will only add that we call it a Bader offer system for the names of these two politicians that you mentioned.
We call it the Bader offer system for the two MKs that really suggested to adapt it in Israel. One of them was a member of the Labour Party, which was at the time the ruling party. And the other one was the head of a party that later became the ruling party, the Likud. Okay, so these were the two members that chose.
But there is an additional complication in this story because, according to the law, two electoralists can make a remainder agreement between them. What is the meaning of this?
Okay, in Israel, two parties can have a remainder agreement, and this kind of an agreement should be presented to the organizers of the elections, to the electoral committee that runs the elections, and the agreement holds only if both parties overcame the threshold. If one of these parties did not overcome the threshold, the votes are not counted. But if both parties overcame the threshold, what we do is something very simple. We regard the agreement between the parties as a single party. Okay, party X made an agreement with party Y. Both of them overcame the threshold. So first of all, we look at the votes given to party X and Y as if they were given to one single party. And we make the calculation. And then we have to allocate the seats between party X and party Y that had such an agreement. And then we employ this method of highest mean once again. So if a small party makes an agreement with a large party, most chances, it's not certain, but most chances are that the large party will gain the extra seat because sometimes it's more than one seat, could be even two seats, but usually it's one seat. And in such a case that two parties made an agreement, and by the way, we don't have the time to discuss that, but actually it caused once, many years ago, in the 1970s, a political assassination because someone didn't understand the rules and said, well, I had such a large number of extra votes, and in spite of that, it was not, the extra seat was not given to me. And then they had an argument within the list, who is going to do what, and it ended in an assassination. A very juicy story, but not very important to understand the system.
Yeah. So I gather from what you said that it's wise for the parties, if they're going to make this agreement, if they're more or less of the same size, because there are different sizes, it benefits the larger party in this
That's
agreement.
right. But usually parties are making the agreements according to, I would say, ideological proximity. For instance, we had two ultra-Orthodox parties in these elections, and for sure they will have such an agreement. And if we look at the parties that support Netanyahu, the Likud, which probably will be the largest party, will make such an agreement with a much smaller party
2019.
appeared. Okay, but that's what we have, and that's the system.
Okay, so it's exactly. You move now to the question of electoral threshold, and it's actually the topic I want to discuss now, because now the threshold is 3.25, but it was raised several times. So we started from less than 1% and moved to this by several stages. And at least the reason that at least was explicitly given for that, and many people believe in that it would provide a political system with more stability, because there will be less small parties in the parliament. And you, a bit counterintuitively, but I believe completely correctly, you thought that the contrary would be the case, that actually the higher threshold would bring more political instability and not less. So what? Why do you think this? How can you explain this to our viewers, but whom I think most presume that the higher threshold you have, the less parties you have in the parliament and the more stability you have?
Okay, this has to do with something which is called voting power, a term used in political science, but especially in game theory. And in order to explain that, I'll give an example that I gave to the Knesset committee that discussed the raising the threshold. That was the example that I gave. And what I said was, suppose that we have 59 seats given to the largest party, short of a majority, okay? And 51 seats given to the second largest party. And there are some small parties, 5 parties, say, we each with 2 seats. Okay, so we have 59, 51, and 5 parties with 2 seats each. In that case, the situation for the largest party is really very good. Why is it so good? Because it can join forces with any of the other parties. Okay, just a minute for a second.
Yeah, sure. So meanwhile, I will explain again. I will repeat to the viewers.
Here I am again. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. The cat didn't approve what I said, so I had to get rid of it.
It joined forces with other members of Knesset who didn't believe what you said, and now they're paying the price.
Yeah. So the cat also paid the price. So in that case, the 59 seats party is in a very good position because it has to mobilize one of the other 6 parties, one of the 2 seats parties, or the second largest party with the 51, and it will have a majority. Now suppose that in order to get rid of the small parties, we raise the threshold. And all the small parties got panicked and united. And instead of having now 59, 51, and 5 parties of 2, we have the third party has 10 seats. Okay, we have 50, and because they were pressured by raising the threshold, they were pressured to join forces. So we have 59, 51, and 10. And in that case, each party, each of the three parties has the same voting power, because any two parties can form a coalition. Any two parties can form a coalition. Now, suppose, for instance, that the 10 seats are parties of the center, all of them. And we know that the two large parties never agree between them. We have 59 on the left, 51 on the right, and now 10 united seats in the center. So, from a political point of view, they are even stronger than the two other parties, because if they turn to the right, they will say, well, we will join forces with the 51. And the 51 will be very happy, especially if they get a majority in the government, okay, etc. So by raising the threshold, normally, unless by raising the threshold, you create artificially a majority party. If you create a majority party, that's a different story. But if you do not create a majority party, okay, you really weaken the small parties if they remain small and don't unite. You weaken the large party, which is most probable to form the coalition, not necessarily, but very likely. And what you do is that you give power to the medium-sized parties, and you really complicate matters. When that was discussed in the Knesset, less than 10 years ago, actually, it was, there were seen several elections in Germany. And I said, look at Germany. In Germany, they have a threshold of 5%, really a fully proportional system, like in Israel. By the way, with the largest remainder system, not with the largest mean system. But generally speaking, that's what they have. There are other components of the system, but the bottom line is that they have proportional system with a higher threshold than in Israel, 5%. And I said there are too many medium-sized parties in Germany, and some of them are not really potential partners in any kind of coalition. And Merkel is going to have problems. And if you look at the different coalitions that Merkel presented, in most cases, after very long negotiations, she had to form a coalition with the largest loser of the party, with the SPD. Okay, so the right-wing party of Merkel couldn't form a coalition with the small parties because the small became medium-sized or too extreme. So in most cases, I think in 3 cases, she had to bring into the coalition the Social Democratic Party, the SPD, which was the loser. So it's not as intuitively you believe. You raise a threshold, you hear the small parties. You do hear the small parties. But at the same time, you even hurt more the largest party, which is supposed to lead the coalition. Okay, but that's what we have now in Israel, and it caused many, many problems. In addition to the problems of the too many wasted votes because they were either invalid or because of the high threshold, etc., etc.
I must say that you were completely right in this prediction, because we have really this Knesset of medium-sized parties and we have this coalition of medium-sized parties. But I noticed that whenever you give some advice to Knesset members, you're usually right, and in most cases they don't listen, and then they regret it. But it's kind of post factum, and they regret it. So
thank you for the compliment, but I'll give you another rule.
Okay.
If I volunteer to give the advice, they wouldn't listen. If they ask for my advice, there is a better chance that they will obey my advice. And if they ask for the advice and the pain for the paper are right, That's the best situation. But in too many cases, I volunteer. I say, listen, you're doing stupid things, etc., etc. They don't listen, and sometimes it ends in catastrophes, as we do have in Israel
Okay.
for
But
so many times.
But in this particular case, because there is such an illusion in the public that electoral threshold solves the problem, I think you are both you now go against the stream, both against the politicians and the public, and the public doesn't realize that the high
It's
electoral
not only the
threshold is.
public, you know. I wouldn't give names, but I heard several of your colleagues
Mhm.
in your department in the university are also, very intuitive about it because they don't really understand the mathematics. Okay, so
The mathematics of this particular case, I think many of them are good at mathematics, but here in this particular case, they are mistaken. I would say
yeah,
this.
you really have to. It's a whole issue. The issue of voting power is really very very much developed, and I don't know. At least one scholar who is not with us anymore, died several years ago, got a Nobel Prize in economics for his work on this very issue. And people are not aware of that. Okay, so they think about it intuitively. And, it's also a matter of chance. Sometimes they are right, sometimes it's a matter of probability. But the probability that a high threshold will hurt the system is higher than the other way around, especially where there is no chance to artificially establish a majority party.
Okay. So we finished with this, and there are some two brief matters that I want to understand. They're a bit complicated. They're new in Israeli law, but so we need to understand what's going on there. Israel has now invented an office which I think doesn't exist anywhere in the world, neither in democracies nor in non-democracies, which is called, and which is officially translated as alternate prime minister. Who is this guy? Alternate prime minister. What does this mean?
Okay. In many countries, and by the way, Germany is a good example, we have a national unity government. Okay? And we had such a government really for the first time after the elections of 1984. And the two large parties at the time, the alignment headed by Shimon Peres and the Likud headed by Yitzhak Shamir, couldn't form a coalition. Okay? They couldn't form a coalition. So after a long period of negotiations, they decided to join forces. And because they had about the same claim for premiership, they decided that the first will be the leader of one party, the largest party, Shimon Peres, for 2 years. And then Shamir will become the leader, the prime minister in the last 2 years. And in order to do that, they shaked hands and they believed each other. Some people
And it worked.
And it worked. So Peres was the prime minister between 84 and 86. And then they called a new vote of confidence from the Knesset, as you explained before. And the vote of confidence was given to the new party. Actually, it was one single coalition, one single government, but the rotation was formally done by voting for 2 years headed by Shamir. Now, what we had in Israel is that there was a very deep distrust between the two partners that were considered to be prime ministers. And the two partners that were considered as prime ministers in Israel were Benjamin Netanyahu and Benjamin Benny Gantz. Okay? So they made an agreement, but they were not sure that shaking hands is enough.
Mhm.
So in order to overcome the problem of how to make it guaranteed, okay, they changed the basic law, the government. They changed the law, and they put in the law all kinds of legal things that imposed the implementation of the rotation between the two of them after all. And in spite of guaranteeing the agreement by law, it didn't work.
Mhm.
Okay, and the rotation was not implemented, but now we are stuck with that law. And the law was implemented only in the present government, and the rotation now was between two other guys, Bennett, a very strong, medium size, 7 seat size party, was the first one. And then the second one is the head of the transition government today, Yair Lapid. So it's all became the whole change in the law was because people didn't trust each other. Okay, and so they said in order to make it to formalize the agreement, let's change the law, and we're stuck with it. I hope not for forever. I hope that it will be changed in the near future.
I think the one possible negative implication of this law with which we are stuck is that now this informal rule of the Israeli politics, in which everyone recognizes the big guy, he will be the prime minister or she will be the prime minister, who's the head of the largest party in the coalition, it was kind of broken, and now every medium-sized player can think, okay, I also want a share in prime ministership for some time. So it further destabilizes the system. Am I right?
I don't want to make speculations, but I think what's going to happen after the coming elections, then there are really two possibilities. One possibility is that the bloc supporting Benjamin Netanyahu will have a majority of 61 or more. And there is my belief is that there is a very good chance that Benjamin Netanyahu will offer someone outside the bloc, such as Benny Gantz, to join the coalition. And we'll see. Maybe Benny Gantz will join the coalition because maybe it's better to be in a coalition and not in opposition with people that you don't really like or trust or something like that. So that's one possibility. The other possibility is that the bloc of four parties supporting Benjamin Netanyahu will not have a majority, will have something short of 61, say 59 or something like that. And in that case, this strange law about the alternate prime minister may save the system. No one thought about it before, but in that case, there is a possibility that Netanyahu will turn to Benny Gantz and will offer him once again to have a rotation between the two of them, where Gantz will be the first prime minister, in spite of the fact that his party is going to be by far less seats.
Mm-hmm.
But it will be very difficult for Gantz to refuse such an offer. It's an offer you can't refuse, like they say in The Godfather. Okay, it's not as bloody. On the contrary, it's generous, but it's definitely politically possible. So the system that we have may serve goals which were not thought about by those who changed the law. But once you have the law, it can serve you in so many. I can name other stories about how the law was used contrary to the intentions of those who wrote the law. But that's basically the story. Now we are stuck with it. It might help in one of the scenarios that I discussed just now, but altogether, I think that it's a very bad idea.
Okay. And so to the last topic, which is the Norwegian law. What is called the Norwegian law? Could you just explain briefly what it means and what were the changes in this Norwegian law? And again, maybe have some ideas. Is it good or bad, or what are the implications of this?
Okay, so the basic idea, it's called Norwegian. It's not implemented in Norway. There is something, which resembles it, but it's not really Norwegian. We call it the Norwegian law. What we have is that what happens to someone who was nominated to a job, a post of minister in the government, and he is a Knesset member. By the way, ministers should not necessarily be Knesset members, but usually they are Knesset members. So someone was nominated as a minister, and he is a Knesset member. So the present law, what we call the Norwegian law, says that person, it's not relevant to the prime minister, but it's relevant to any other minister in the cabinet. The minister can resign from the Knesset, become a minister, and then the next on the list replaces him. As you explained at the beginning of our discussion, or before I was part of the discussion, the next on the list substitute him. And if 2 or 3 becomes ministers and decide to resign from the Knesset, they don't have to decide to resign. But if they decide to resign, there are 3 ministers, 2 of them decided to resign, so 2 members at the bottom of the list will enter the Knesset. Now, what is special in Israel is that if the minister decides to resign his post as a minister and return to the Knesset, the last one from his list that enters the Knesset goes home. Okay, so he's guaranteed. Now, it's really very strange, and it's a way to tempt politicians to get more money, more jobs, and you are guaranteed. And I'll say what I believe might be a good idea of implementing a Norwegian law. You can say, well, if someone enters the cabinet, automatically he has to resign. He should resign, and someone substitute him. But there is no return. You cannot resign the cabinet and return to the Knesset. And that will stabilize the system. Because the interest of the minister is that the government will continue for the longest period possible. So he has his job. There's someone else in the parliament, so that might stabilize the system. But they really had in mind not the idea of stabilizing the system. What the idea was is to make it easier for ministers to become ministers, etc. I'll have to say just one more sentence about it. In the very distant past, the law in Israel was that if someone becomes a minister and resigns from the Knesset, automatically he's kicked out of the government as well, because his resignation from the Knesset insults the Knesset. And the Knesset is the supreme, officially, it is the supreme body that, so Begin was the one who suggested it, and the change in the law that said you cannot really resign from the cabinet and become, if you resign from the Knesset, automatically you are kicked out of the government. No way to do it. So Begin suggested it, and by the way, he was one of the first to break the idea because there are political necessities. So they changed the law, and then they said, well, you can join the coalition, join the government, and resign from the Knesset. And later on, they said not only that you can resign from the Knesset and someone substitute you, you can return to the Knesset, and the one who came because you resigned is going home. So that's a history of all kinds of considerations of people. It's not really that relevant, but I'll tell you the truth. I met a very, very, very senior politician in the Knesset about 3 months ago. and he joked with me, and he said, "I don't know the Knesset members. Every day we have a new Knesset member because some minister joins the coalition, and new face to know, etc., etc. Who are these people? I don't know their names." So the system was so unstable recently, and so many nominations were done for ministers who went in the coalition and out, that it became really a joke.
I must add to this that this also happened because of an amendment to this law. That previously, every list, every faction could use this only once, only to appoint one minister who resigns from the Knesset. Then only one additional member becomes a member. And now this kind of open for everyone. So many ministers who became ministers resign from Knesset.
It's okay. It's okay. Even I can even find logic, as I said before, in compulsory resignation. So they have to devote all their time to the cabinet. They are part of the executive branch now, and there's a separation of powers. The parliament is parliament. That's it. Everything is stabilized, etc. But the idea that it's not compulsory, you can make it, and you can make it for any number of ministers in the party that you have in mind, and that they can return. It's really, the only calculation was really the personal benefit of the senior people in the different parties, which is a shame, I think.
Yeah. So I think we covered most of the topics we wanted to cover, and I'm very grateful you've made everything very clear to us. And thank you for joining me in this discussion. And we'll continue with our live streaming later. So thank you, Professor Diskin.
Thank you very much, Ephraim.
Okay. So we are now about to finish this first stream in the series of streams about the approaching Israeli parliamentary election. The next stream is scheduled for the 8th of October, and then I will discuss the current Knesset and the current parties, the political situation during the last year and a half. And it will be perhaps a longer and more complex discussion. There is a lot to talk about. It's now scheduled for the 8th of October. The date or time may change. In order to follow these changes, please enter this second stream video in my YouTube channel and press notify me. Then you will be notified about any changes. And of course, I encourage you to likes to this video so that it helps spread the word. Thank you and have a nice day.